The first session that we have is basically about Africa's next chapter, building a sustainable and inclusive growth framework. It's being moderated by Lisbeth Arlens here. Lisbeth is currently with Impact Fund Denmark, who were formerly the IFU, and she's over 30 years' experience of investing in Africa with them specifically, or with them with 30 years. Yeah. But I'd like to hand over to Lisbeth, and look forward to hearing the panel.
Thank you. And thank you for showing up. Let me introduce our distinguished panel. We are a little bit of a mixed group representing various areas of organizations that have a heart beating for Africa. So from the private equity investment side, we have two reps. We have Noha. Noha is a managing director for Egypt at Mediterranean Capital Partners, with nearly two decades of financial services, private equity and venture capital experience. She's recognized by Forbes, by the way, as one of the top 100 power business women in Middle East, and brings a deep expertise in investment and impact across Africa. So welcome, Noha. Looking forward to talking to you. And then we have David Kleiterp. He's an emerging market investment professional with over 12 years of experience in private equity and venture capital. Currently head of investment at Untapped Global, and you have another initiative going, I know, and I'm going to ask you a little bit about that when we get started. And then from the investment advisory side, we have two representatives. We have Sineb, who's head of business development at Casablanca Finance City Authority, where she's shaped Morocco's financial center for over a decade. And Casablanca Finance City Authority supports businesses, I think, in Morocco and beyond, right? Definitely. Yes. So Sineb's background spans international debt capital markets and strategic partnerships, making her a key player in Africa's financial transformation. Then we have Guy Barron. Guy is there. Guy is global lead of investment at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, advising governments across 40 emerging countries, including 18 in Africa. Formerly Chief Investment Officer at Wanda Development Board. Guy brings a wealth of experience in sovereign investment, private sector development and impact-driven initiatives. And then from the DFI world, the Development Finance Institution world, we are actually represented by two Nordic DFIs, myself, no need to say more about me. And then from Norway, we have Carl Johan Valund from Norfund. Welcome, Carl Johan. You are Senior Vice President of Green Infrastructure at Norfund, 18 years in circular economy and sustainability sector, leading investments in waste, water and digital infrastructure. That's your main focus at the moment. So welcome, all of you. So inclusive economic development in emerging markets hinges to a great extent on creating opportunities that are inclusive, sustainable and resilient. And what we're going to talk about today is what the key drivers are and what roles governments, agencies, DFIs, the private equity industry and private sector can play in fostering this change. And we will also touch a little bit upon what are the hindrances we see to unlock the growth potential in Africa. And but let me start with you, Guy. So how do you see governments can play a role in driving this agenda?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I think from our perspective, working inside government, which is how we're positioned. So we support governments across the continent, 18 of them, as you mentioned. We embed advisors inside government who stay there for the long term. So we don't sort of fly in, fly out. We work day in, day out with heads of Governments starting usually from a head of state through key ministries or key institutions that promote investment. And we tend to see governments make a few difficult decisions. There's a few difficult dilemmas that they face, government leaders, and those tend to be sort of in three categories. The first tends to be short-term versus long-term. You know, there's tremendous pressure to deliver results, tremendous pressure to show that things are moving, and yet, will it be sustainable? Will it work for the long term? And how do you do it in a transparent way that delivers results? That's both inclusive and sustainable. The second is how to balance political capital, which is the most valuable asset in politics, and the dilemma around how do we, when do we cash it in? When do we use it? When do we not use it? Who's the right investor? Who do you want to bet on? You know, will my political capital result in a deal happening or not? And that is a real dilemma for a lot of politicians. And then the third one is often how to think like an investor. And that sounds overly simplistic, but I think maybe some fellow panelists will appreciate that. But it's often very challenging for a government official to think like an investor. And that means, you know, time is money. What matters to de-risk a deal? Issues like, is it okay for an investor to be profitable? I mean, that sounds so obvious to everybody on the panel. But, you know, we often find that there's this dilemma around, should I be worried, should I be nervous if an investor is doing really well? Did I do something wrong? Is that going to look bad? And so we often joke that for politicians, signing the deal and getting the photo op is the end of the road. For the investor, it's the beginning. And so how to draw the, you know, connection between those two. So the real question becomes on those three things, how do governments deploy that? And we would argue to make very wise decisions about how to deploy those three things, how to use your capital, how to make those long-term decisions, and then how to think like an investor. And a lot of it comes down to facilitation, private sector understanding, open dialogue, and an appreciation that you really need the private sector to make these growth targets work. The governments can't do it on their own. So that's really where we tend to push from the inside out.
Right. Yeah. So another government agency angle we have here is you, CINEP. Your organization operates as a financial hub for businesses from across the world. So what is it exactly that you do, and what role can your organization play in creating impact and opportunities for businesses?
You hear me well? Yeah?
Yeah, we hear you.
Perfect.
Thanks.
So I really think that, you know, international financial centers like ourselves have an instrumental role to play when it comes to turn, you know, Africa's raw potential into sustainable, value-added, inclusive growth. I mean, at the end of the day, we most of the time, you know, act as magnets, bringing together capital, expertise, talent, obviously, as well. And so at CFC in particular, obviously, we don't act as doers. I mean, we don't go and invest directly on, you know, various projects, but we act as enablers, as catalysts, which is equally important. So we do that across basically several dimensions. First, we create a sort of conducive environment for a business to thrive, because if you want to attract long-term, serious investors, you need to provide a stable, transparent, internationally compliant framework. Otherwise, many of those investors simply won't come and won't show up. So this is what we do. We basically, we provide them with a trusted structure and platform. And at the end of the day, those investors, they are comfortable putting their money to work on things that really matter on the continent, whether we're talking about innovative startup companies who have tangible benefits on local communities, or small or big, infrastructure projects, climate resilience projects, I mean, you name it. So it's all about creating all the right conditions for investments to flow into projects that are both profitable, because they need to be, but also impactful. Second, we act as a bridge, basically, between global capital and local opportunities, because obviously Africa is full of promising projects, but without a platform to connect the supply and demand, Again, many of those, projects unfortunately remain underfunded. So our role basically at CFC is also to link those international investors with businesses, with entrepreneurs on the ground. One way that we do that is through, for example, initiatives like what we call the CFC Africa Tour. So it's a program where we take our members directly into promising markets in Africa. We introduce them locally to high-level counterparts, to policymakers, business leaders, enabling, at the end of the day, for some very strategic, projects to come to life. 3, we also act as huge advocates for Africa, as like sounding boards for the continent. So we just basically go out there and tell Africa's story to the world, either through roadshows that we organize on a very regular basis every year, or by hosting delegations at Casablanca, Finance City, or even by maybe publishing thematic reports on various topics, sustainable finance, AFSIC, on various very different, not just sustainable ones. And the idea is just to provide investors with a better and deeper understanding of African economies and kind of try and reduce the risks, associated with market entry in Africa. Because, if we are to be honest, there is a big, still today, information asymmetry when it comes to Africa. So it's also our role to bridge that gap, to showcase success stories on the continent, and to just provide enough confidence for the investors to basically think that Africa is not a future opportunity like we keep hearing, but it's a present one. And also, there is this sort of clustering effect that goes with financial centers. And what makes CFC unique in particular is not this just diversity of actors that we host. It's the way they work together to shape responsible, future-oriented solutions. So, for example, by clustering financial and advisory services, will make it possible for a sustainable project to be both financed and structured. So when a renewable energy developer or fintech company comes to CFC, they don't just find financing, they also find the legal expertise, the risk coverage, the advisory services, basically everything they might need to build a scalable, impactful solution for the continent. And finally, I would say that these topics, sustainability, inclusivity, these are not just like abstract concepts for us or marketing tools. They've really been embedded in our DNA since day one. So we've co-founded the FC4S, the Financial Centers for Sustainability. It's a global network, co-founded, by the way, also with the UN, the UNEP, which is the UN Environment Program, and was also signed, by the way, and launched in Casablanca. So that gives you an idea of how committed we were from the very start. Also, we were actually at CFC, we launched Africa's first ever green bond, and that was to basically support our, expansion real estate program. And something that's a little bit more topical today, we are actually spearheading the efforts to create a credible, carbon market ecosystem. So in partnership with CDG, which is a Morocco's sovereign, investment development fund, we signed a landmark agreement in 2024 to basically build, a regional VCM, so voluntary carbon market. And more broadly, I'm sorry, I'm taking a little bit, too long, but more broadly, it's something that we really encourage within our community. We have a lot of members who actually are working on tangible solutions on the ground to basically address one of Africa's biggest challenges, so financial inclusion, food security, climate resilience. One example is like Sowit, for example. It's an agri-tech company. They actually use data and satellite imagery to basically help farmers make smarter decisions about like when to irrigate, how much to irrigate, how much fertilizers to use. And thanks to CFC, they've been able to expand in several other countries in Africa, making, at the end of the day, in those countries, more, more productive lands, less pressure on natural resources, better livelihoods and farmers. And this is just one example showing that at the end of the day, for us, it's not just a theory. It's like real stories, real companies, real communities that benefit from those projects that have been nurtured at CFC.
Okay, interesting. Right. So David, turning to you, I'm very curious. I mean, because apart from heading Untapped Global, you're building a new initiative called Mobilis Capital, partners focusing on SMEs. Can you tell us a little bit about that initiative?
Yeah, so with Untapped, what we've been doing is basically asset financing and working capital through data-driven finance. So we integrate with the companies that we invest in. And we've recognized that especially if you want to target the SMEs, right, you also have to split the business between a fintech company and an investment management side, and that's why we I decided to take over the investment management side of things. So what we've seen is that the embedded finance is growing very quickly, and there are a lot of companies that need debt, but they need debt in a specific way that allow them to grow as well. And basically, we've created this SPV structure where investors can come in either through an equity layer or through a senior debt structure. And what we can do is then deploy capital very quickly because we are already integrated with companies that we've invested in. So we have invested in around $17 million in 16 countries and 60 companies. So we've done like 90 new disbursements. There are a lot of these companies that need more capital. It's not only equity that they need, but there's definitely a venture debt component that's very important here.
And what challenges do you see in that work?
The challenges is one is of course the level of maturity of the companies and how well they are, how well they understand the data. Because I see that like there's a rollover effect, right? If they have their structure right and if they understand it and they're using the right loan management systems or ERP systems, then it makes my life easier. But then it also makes the life easier of the next institutional investor that wants to invest, right? So that's I think one of the challenges. There are other challenges as well, but it's also about the risk that you take and that you need to understand. So I think here you need to have two different components. One is a vehicle where you can basically incubate, well, not incubate, but you can really help these companies through technical assistance and by providing them with a small debt check. Then you need to have a second phase, which is more of a commercial fund. And then that commercial fund can be like a structure for institutional investors to come in. So there's not one issue per se that needs to happen.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And then Nora, so you're coming from the private equity industry with strong focus on sustaining financial returns. So looking at your portfolio of companies, what does inclusive growth actually look like inside your portfolio companies?
So basically for us, I think sustainable development and inclusive growth goes hand in hand with private sector development. So our mandate is to invest in SMEs and mid-cap companies across North and Sub-Saharan Africa. And these companies, they represent the backbone for the African economy and for employment and for social stability. So they employ over 80% of the African workforce. They generate more than 50% of the African GDP. And for us, it's not just about growth capital. It's not just about injecting money into the company, but it's about what we do after we invest, because there's a lot of entrepreneurial energy in Africa, and there's also a lot of liquidity and dry powder in Africa.
Yes.
But the bridge between both is the real problem, and this is what we focus on. So we have a very specific value creation model that we replicate across all our companies that governs basically everything in the organization, from governance to HR to workforce conditions to things related to budgeting and strategy setting. And this is where the real heavy lifting is. So we are very actively involved in portfolio management. We go in deep, for example, in the first 100 days, we have functional boards, we have audit committees, we have risk committees, we have HR committees. Just a recent example, we just invested in a company in Egypt, and that company didn't really have a robust HR structure. They basically had personnel and payroll and stuff like that. So from day one, we hired an HR director that came in with a very focused strategy. We rolled out a training program for more than 500 employees. We completely restructured the incentive schemes for the employees to be more merit-based, for them to be able to generate more income for themselves when the company grows better. And we've seen the company do, in parallel with all of this, we've seen it grow more than 50%, and it's just been 9 months since we invested in this company. So you can see how our money is not just about mobilizing capital, but also about building careers for the people that are within these organizations. So far, across our portfolio, we employ around 27,000 people, 10,000 of which have been created after our investments in these companies, in our portfolio companies. One of the other things that we also see as inclusion is strengthening the supply chains across African countries. So while our countries of focus for investments are specific to North and Francophone West Africa, but they operate in more than 20 countries across Africa. So that also deepens more the Africa to Africa supply chain, basically. So, of course, there are so many other things that we do, but these are the things that we focus on, especially in the first 12 months of investment.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of, planning, or maturing your portfolio companies for a good exit or a good return, do you see that it adds value to the company valuation, that you have been working with inclusion, with maturing the companies, setting good ESG measurements for their growth and operations and so on? Does it have a value when you do the final valuation and go out and find a buyer for your portfolio companies?
Definitely. And I'll tell you, for us, ESG and the ESG function, and we have a very specific ESG team. It's not just about the ESG team. Our whole investment team is embedded when it comes into ESG principles. It's not just about compliance and reporting and all of these things. We really see it as value adding in the operations of the business. So again, for example, this very recent investment that we've done, we've gone through a process with them whereby they work in plastic packaging. So whereby a lot of the decision making now is going towards, or the investment decisions are going towards, machinery that is able to recycle more, that is able to use less plastic. So that saves a lot of costs because their material costs are going down, their margins are improving. From an ESG perspective, they're scoring better. From a multiples perspective, we're expecting to have multiple accretion when it comes to our exit. From a talent perspective, it attracts much better talent, and better talent means better management, better operations, better strategy, better growth. So definitely from even an operational perspective and looking purely on the financial returns, it's very accretive when you look into taking these decisions on an operating level. But I have to also be a little bit controversial here, because for us, value, growth and financial returns are a bit tricky in the countries in which we operate, because there are so many other things that affect that other than the individual performance of the company. So one of the key things, and I'm managing the Egyptian portfolio, one of the key things that we suffer from is macroeconomic impact on currency devaluations and all of these things. So one of the other things that we work on with our portfolio companies is to make sure that they're not purely localized in their markets, but to go regional as well, because that saves them a lot from macroeconomic shocks that are irrespective of their individual operations. So one of the things that we set again from day one is a regional strategy, is an export-oriented strategy, is a strategy whereby they de-risk from single government policies or single currency impacts or single country inflation rates or stuff like that, to be able to withstand, again, from a sustainable perspective, their operations. And again, that reflects on the commercial returns and the de-risking of their operations, basically.
Right. Yeah. And then over to the development finance institution world, Carl-Johan. So you focus in your job on green infrastructure, and in particular waste management, water treatment, and digital infrastructure. And those are all technologies that are very well known and managed in Europe, for instance. So I mean, how do you see? I mean, but in developing countries, it's something that is extremely difficult to work with, and And why? And why is that? I mean, why can't we just copy what works in developed countries to the developing countries and help them get water and waste management on top?
Yep. And I should just say that Norfund, which is a Norwegian DFI, we have selected these couple of sectors for the specific purpose of developing sectors which struggle to develop by themselves. Right. So, and within both water and waste, you have a couple of inherent challenges. Starting with waste, that is when developing sustainable cities, and you have population growth, and you have increase of wealth, you have also very significant increases of waste volume. So it's super important to enable waste management in cities which develop. But the waste, per definition, is something you want to get rid of, right? So at that point when you want to get rid of it, it lacks value. And if you look at other sectors, although there are an abundance of challenges in those as well, most people want the product which you manufacture or the service that you offer. But waste, nobody wants. So that's kind of where the first challenge starts. And you need to have then tax systems or public systems which take care of that waste which no one would like to take kind of personal responsibility for. And in countries where taxation and regulatory and enforcement is lacking, then that becomes a problem. So we need to find other ways to solve the waste problem. And although at kind of the point when people throw away waste, it has no value, that's just for the person throwing it away. So there might be value in it for other people, and that's where you see you have tens of thousands of waste pickers living off that waste. And for us as investors, we then can pinpoint different sub-sectors or niches or pockets within the waste management sector, which are profitable if you add financing and capex and upgrade the value of certain products. But so that is a little bit why we can't just copy a few solutions which work. You have another common solution in at least Northern Europe, which is incineration and waste to energy. And that has been discussed. I mean, I've received 100 pitches from different projects in Africa where waste to energy and incineration is being presented as the general solution for taking care of plastic waste or household waste. But if you look at how the economics work in at least in Norway, 40% of the revenue comes from tax financing or a gate fee for processing. 40% comes from district heating and 20% comes from electricity. And if you would set up this in Africa, you would not need district heating. And the 40% which comes from gate fees, in some countries you have gate fees, but it's on a very, very minimal level compared to what you would have in European countries. So then you are left with some 20% of the revenue which you would have in kind of a Nordic setting due to different circumstances, and that makes it difficult. So then you need to find other ways to extract value and also to process this in a more cost-efficient manner.
So what you're saying is that well, politically, there are a lot of challenges in introducing waste treatment in Africa, because of, I mean, you're taking away the means of income for local communities who actually live from collecting and selling waste. So what's the solution?
So for that, I mean, we do recognize that there is tens of thousands of informal waste pickers living off that.
Yes.
And what we believe is that the development of or developing waste management in Africa is inevitable. We can't not do that. I think there is at the same time a benefit in, or we strive for formalizing those informal jobs, not all 10,000s, but one at a time. So we impose requirements on the projects and on our investees to have certain conditions, both in terms of compensation and social security, pension, and so on, which should improve working conditions for these groups. So while there, of course, in the long run is a risk that there will be less waste pickers on the landfills in Africa, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because there would come out other opportunities from that. And to the political point, I think another dilemma which we are faced with in the water sector is, 40-50% of all the water which is produced is non-revenue water, which is lost in different ways. It is, in many places, it's both legally and, of course, morally very complicated to shut off someone's connection if they stop paying or can't afford to pay. And would you then want to shut off the connection in order to make them pay? No, you don't want that, right? So then you also need to find other models, in order to allow for people at different levels or income levels to afford a basic water consumption. So there's a lot of cross-subsidization between industry and lower income households in terms of in water management. So there are some tools and tricks you can apply, but yes, it's difficult to just copy paste some of the European solutions.
Right. So, Guy, you were talking about political capital, and you were sort of also indicating that, or is that a misinterpretation? But you were sort of indicating that investing in Africa, deploying funding for Africa, comes with a higher reputational risk. Is that what you mean, or what do you look at that? Or maybe, David, you're smiling. I mean,
it's, investing always comes with a risk, right? So whether that's political but yeah, you need to you need to understand what the risk is, and you need to then act upon it, right? And then you have different levels of risk where you can play. So I think.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that, and I assume you mean from an investor's perspective. Again, I'll defer to my right in terms of what they see, but yeah, there's certainly risks that exist in frontier markets. Africa being obviously one of those big areas where there's a lot to consider, right? There's a lot of macro risks, micro risks, ESG. The list goes on and on and on. So, from the government's perspective, I think the key question is, how do you create an enabling environment that will allow that de-risking, right? How do you allow an efficient deployment of capital into your country or into assets that make sense? Money's fungible. The world is a big place. There's lots of places investors can go. Why should they come here? And so that is the burden in many ways that government has to carry, particularly if they're so hands-on, right? I think in a lot of countries, there's this dilemma between, should I avoid the government or should I engage the government? And there's some places you can get away with staying below the radar, and some investors prefer that. And in other places you just simply can't, or you won't get your returns or the structural needs or the de-risking or the guarantees that you need in order to get a project built and done. So, so government does play a real role, I would argue even at the SME level, with this facilitation and enablement. But yes, the risks are absolutely there. I'd like to believe the returns are there. Again, I'll defer to the right, but you know, risk reward, I think is ideally sort of the balance. But yeah, no doubt that there's certain structural benefits that I think investors would benefit from, say, you know, duration, right? How long can I have my capital for in order to deploy it with a longer return horizon than you would in maybe other parts of the world. So yeah, it is risky, and I think there's parts the private sector can do to make that more workable. But again, we see governments carrying a pretty heavy burden of needing to ensure that that's doable and workable. You can extract your money, you can repatriate funds, you can do a lot of different things that allow the investment to come in. So it really is in many ways a partnership.
And then I'm going to ask you all 5 a yes and no question, yes or no question, for to wrap up this discussion. Is there hope for Africa in terms of inclusive growth going forward? David?
Yes.
Yes. Noha?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, Guy?
Yeah, 100%.
Sineb?
Come on, yes, of course.
Carl-Johan?
Yeah, of course.
All right. And it's also going to be a yes for me. I really see, I see we are going in the right direction, but I also think it's going slow. But with these words, I'll open the floor. Are there any questions to the panelists before we close off? No? Then you have answered perfectly well and enlightened all of us on
Was the yes.
what inclusive growth in Africa means and where it's heading. You have a question. All right.
Robert Hornsby, Hello. Robert Hornsby, my company, Jobomax, builds homes in West Africa and finances them mostly for the diaspora. And my question is about integrating diaspora investment and participation into this inclusive framework. How do you see that being part of the picture?
Anyone? Guy?
You want me to?
Noah?
Yeah, we can. So basically, we see that a lot in our Moroccan presence, because there's a lot of Moroccan diaspora that is investing back into the continent. And what we've done is not just look into DFI money for our investments, but we also are trying to mobilize local capital from local institutions, like, for example, Mohammed VI Fund, the Sovereign Fund, as well as local investors, pretty much Moroccan businessmen that we've invested with before, that we've grown companies before with, that we've actually built unicorns before with, and then reinvesting that money and making sure that we make sure that this money is reinvested back into the continent.
I mean, I just 2 cents. I think it's a critical source of investment, right? Because it's a pool that exists outside. Remittance is understood to be a large source of funding into the continent. So the diaspora's ability to come back, invest, presumably it's longer-term capital, it's very much needed. I've not seen it factor into large plans for where investment's going to come from, frankly. I think it's still
still on a trial basis.
Yeah.
Basically, yes.
Yeah, it's still talked about as kind of emerging and nascent, and but it would be substantial. I mean, if you look at the U.S., the most successful immigrant group in the U.S. are Nigerians, and so there's a lot of money there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for participating.
Thank you.